The most unbounded wealth is the neighbor of the most hideous poverty. The crumbs which fall from the tables of the rich would appear delicious viands to starving millions. And yet these millions obtain them not. In that city there are in all 5 prominent buildings, the church, in which the pious pray, the gin palace, to which the wretched poor resort to drown their sorrows, the pawnbrokers where miserable creatures pledge their raiment, and their children's raiment, even unto the last rag, to obtain the means of purchasing food, and, alas, too often, intoxicating drink, the prison, where the victims of a vitiated condition of society expiate the crimes to which they have been driven by starvation and despair, and the workhouse to which the destitute, the aged, and the friendless hasten to lay down their aching heads, and die. In central London, the single most notorious slum was St. Giles, a name which by the 19th century had passed into common parlance as a byword for extreme poverty. Infamous since the mid-18th century, St. Giles was defined by its prostitutes, gin shops, secret alleyways where criminals could hide, and horribly overcrowded tenements. Lord Byron excoriated the state of St. Giles in a speech to the House of Lords in 1812, stating that I have been in some of the most oppressed provinces of Turkey, but never under the most despotic of infidel governments did I behold such squalid wretchedness as I have seen since my return in the very heart of a Christian country. At the heart of this area, now occupied by New Oxford Street and Centre Point, was the Rookery, a particularly dense warren of houses along George Street and Church Lane, the latter of which in 1852 was reckoned to contain over 1,100 lodgers in overpacked, squalid buildings with open sewers. The poverty worsened with the massive influx of poor Irish immigrants during the Great Famine of 1848, giving the area the name Little Ireland, or the Holy Land. Government intervention beginning in the 1830s reduced the area of St. Giles through mass evictions, demolitions, and public works projects. New Oxford Street was built right through the heart of the Rookery in 1847, eliminating the worst part of the area, but many of the evicted inhabitants simply moved to neighboring streets, which remained stubbornly mired in poverty. Mass demolition of slums like St. Giles was the usual method of removing problematic pockets of the city. For the most part this just displaced existing residents because the new dwellings built by private developers were often far too expensive for the previous inhabitants to afford. In the mid to late 19th century, philanthropists like Octavia Hill and charities like the Peabody Trust focused on building adequate housing for the working classes at affordable rates. George Peabody built his first improved housing for the artisans and laboring poor on Commercial Street in 1864. The Metropolitan Board of Works, the dominant authority before the LCC, was empowered to undertake clearances and to enforce overcrowding and other such standards on landlords by a stream of legislation including the Laboring Classes Dwelling Houses Acts of 1866 and 1867. Overcrowding was also defined as a public health nuisance, beginning in 1855, which allowed medical officers to report landlords in violation to the Board of Health. In 1890, the shortcomings of the existing legislation were refined and condensed into one comprehensive piece of legislation, the Houses of the Working Classes Act. This empowered the LCC to construct its own housing on cleared land, which it had been prohibited from doing before. Thus began a social housing building program in targeted areas like Bethnal Green and Millbank that would accelerate in the next century.